Hello everyone. So last Saturday, one of my previous Spring Boot student attended an interview with Cognizant for 4 years of experience, and this session is happened for 30 minutes. So here you can find out all the questions what are being asked as part of that interview, and the panel is mostly focused on Spring Boot knowledge, like with respect to REST services implementation, and as well as he concentrated on microservices architecture. Why we are going beyond the microservices nowadays? Okay, and what is the importance of microservices? Like he was expecting all the use cases with respect to real-time scenarios point of view. That too he was expecting what is being carried as part of his application development on as part of his day-to-day responsibility. So if you see on a glance, the questions all are around about from the Spring Boot knowledge only. Like he was expecting, like what is Spring Boot application annotation? If you don't want to use Spring Boot application, then how can I start my Spring Boot application? So what are the use case internal implementation of Spring Boot application annotation? And after that, he started asking questions like what is the controller and what is a rest controller, when we have to go for rest controller, when we have to go for controller, what response body annotation will do, and how you are handling the exceptions as part of your application with some use cases he was expecting. So how many ways you are handling exceptions as part of your day-to-day application development, like what the purpose of controller advice, when we have to go for controller advice over the basic try catch exception handling. And he was asking like how you are handling checked exceptions as part of your application development. So these are all questions he was focused. That means the entire session is completely focused with respect to real time use cases and real time implementation by using Spring Boot framework. And after that he asked one of the programming question by giving just finding each and every word length from a given array of values by using Stream API. The panel was expecting in this case by writing the Stream API operations. And once this is being written, so he asked like continuation to that, how you are going to find out the words which are having length greater than 3 and please print those strings from the given array of strings. Like that, he just verified the basic fundamental writing of programming of the candidate by giving these two questions, and that too he was expecting only via Stream API. So what I understood from this interview session is, so the panel was completely focused on how much real-time knowledge person is having with respect to this session. I understood. So let's see quickly how can we answer each and every individual question. Here it is. So whenever any panel is asking about yourself question, then you have to answer by including all what is your career, when your career is started, and what is your overall experience, and as part of which organization you are working right now, and what are the technologies you are working. For example, assume you are working from last 5 years, and from out of 5 years, what is your knowledge in the Spring Boot, like from last 2 years or 3 years or overall 5 years. Like that, you have to include all your information, and you have to just focus on what are the primary technologies you know very well, and whatever the secondary technologies you know, and what are the what are the tools you are aware of, and that too which are going to impact on our day-to-day daily base application development. Those are all information you have to explain within few points here in this case. And then continuation to that, we have to explain about what is your current roles and responsibility, like what you are going to do as part of your application development. Like maybe it is a enhancement you are carrying everyday application development, or maybe you are going with just like monitoring the application with respect to production support, or what kind of activities you are carrying as part of your application. You have to explain all those things as part of this session. So why the reason behind this question here it is just knowing the person overview by from this question. That's why people will ask this question as the first thing. The question here it is about SOAP versus REST. We discussed these things in our previous Spring Boot sessions also. Like SOAP is definitely more secured when comparing with the REST APIs. That's why still in most of the secured applications point of view, people will use SOAP services in crucial communication point of view. But when it comes to the REST, it's very lightweight when comparing with the SOAP, and REST is just part of HTTP protocol, but SOAP is just depending on the XML protocol, and we know that some complexity with respect to SOAP implementation. But REST is all about lightweight with respect to performance point of view and with respect to implementation point of view. And so that's why people are preferring more over the SOAP web services. The more people are preferring only REST services in day-to-day application development. But still couple of companies or couple of areas, not all the areas, people are using SOAP whenever they want to use a little bit security perspective point of view rather than performance perspective. So that is how you can explain all these scenarios. Here it is. So you just Google it and you can find out all the solutions, whatever I explained in detail point of view. So after that, he asked like, what is the importance of Spring Boot? Why people are using Spring Boot nowadays rather than Spring? Like that, he was asking. Yes, We know that we discussed these questions also in our previous Spring Boot sessions tutorial point of view, right? So yes, Spring is the primary framework implemented on Java to implement the Java applications, web applications with respect to all solutions like database operations, web operations, and as well as security operation point of view and all other miscellaneous operations point of view. We have Spring. But the point here it is whenever microservices architecture came into the picture and whenever the container based applications came into the picture, cloud level, serverless applications point of view, we know that Spring is completely just like a normal web framework. Whenever we implemented a Spring web application, especially, we need an external server and it's very we are going to have a lot of challenges with respect to microservices architecture. So to overcome those challenges, the Spring team released as Spring Boot by wrapping all the Spring modules into respective starters, and they released as a Spring Boot framework. So now Spring Boot is more compatible with microservices architecture development or microservices application development. That's why people are using Spring Boot rather than Spring framework. And we know that definitely Spring Boot is came up with one more important concept called as enable auto configuration. Nothing but auto configuration of the components. So whenever you added any respective status as part of your project, all required components will be automatically auto configured internally. That is how Spring Boot is implemented on top of Spring framework. So these are all use cases you have to explain with respect to Spring Boot, and you can say like Spring Boot is finally a wrapper on the Spring. So without Spring knowledge we can't achieve Spring Boot, or if you are learning Spring Boot means directly indirectly we are learning Spring also, right? So we have to explain all these use cases for this question also. And after that, continuation to that, see, if you observe here or not, the questions are just going continuation to the previous question. Now, whenever we mention microservices here, the moment he asked like why microservices, what are the importance of microservices nowadays, why people are going microservices nowadays rather than monolithic like that, right? So we discussed all these points in our previous microservices session also. Yes, definitely microservices architecture is helping us with respect to performance point of view, scalability point of view, maintenance of the application point of view. Yes, definitely microservices giving a lot of advantages, especially scalability of functionality as part of any application. We are going to achieve microservices point of view over the monolithic. So we understood a lot of disadvantages of monolithic. Automatically those are all comes under the advantages of microservices, and just we have to explain all those scenarios. Like for example, whenever we want to deploy a specific functionality as multiple instances in monolithic, you can't do that individually. You have to implement, you have to deploy everything for that functionality point of view. All functionalities has to be deployed. But in microservices point of view, whatever the functionality you are just seeing, only that respective microservice you are going to bring up or you're going to scale up to achieve more performance or to make more availability of that functionality to the incoming user load or traffic point of view, right? So I mean, I'm just explaining on a glance. You just need to focus all this. You have to frame all these points in an order, and you have to explain with respect to all these key components. Now, after that, he asked a general question like, what are the annotations you used so far? So then candidate answered like all, what are the annotations you used so far? Like, especially we know that, right? Basically, we will use like component classes, bean methods, controller classes, service annotation, repository annotation, table, JPA repository, right? So these are all annotations, JPA annotation, web layer annotation, request mapping, request body, response body, controller, rest controller, all these things, right? So from that he took a one more annotation called as @Spring Boot application, and he was asking like what is Spring Boot application, how it is working internally. So then we know that, right, Spring Boot application is combination of three annotations, just like enable auto configuration, component scan, and as well as configuration, right? So we know that the purpose of configuration annotation, so it's all about defining the bean methods. Component scan, it is all about defining the component classes, base packages, all these things. When we are starting our Spring Boot application where our component classes existed, to scan all those things, we are going to provide the base packages information and everything, right? And after that, enable auto configuration, it is going to enable auto configuration respective to the status what we are added, modules added to the our Spring Boot application, right? So even we can disable couple of components from the auto configuration point of view. That also we can configure, right? So these are all information you have to explain as per this question. Now, the next continuation to that, he was asking, in case if I want to start my Spring Boot application without this annotation, Spring Boot application annotation, is it possible or not? If possible, what you have to do? If not possible, what you have to do? I mean, what will happen? Then what issue you will get? Like that, he was asking. Yes, it is possible. How? Because this is what, guys, combination of three annotations. Now, let's do one thing, just remove this annotation and try to add the other individual three annotations and try to start our application. It will take care of internal things and everything, right? So that is how you just need to explain. Just please try before, just please try this scenario once in your application. Yeah, then you can answer very confidently in your sessions. Now, after that, again, a real-time use case point of view, he was asking like, okay, so whenever we created our Spring Boot applications, generally what we will do, guys, we will take a base package, and then whenever we are creating any new packages, we will make sure the base package is existed always. And we know that the Spring Boot application main method class always existed in the base package, and that will become the current base package. And on top of that, whatever the packages you define, those are all will be scanned, right? But he was asking like, I want to exclude few packages from that entire project architecture. So how you have to do that? How to configure that? That means couple of packages should not be scanned while you are starting your Spring Boot application. How to do that? Yes, in this case you have to provide, you are going to take at the rate component scan annotation manually again on the Spring Boot application annotation level, and there you will provide all your, what are the packages you want to scan, what are the packages you want to exclude. You can configure this things manually again here. So those kind of explanation you have to provide here. It is. Now after that, continuation to that, he was asking like, what is the controller annotation and rest controller annotation? Explain with some real use cases instead of saying like controller plus response body equal to rest controller. He was not expecting that one line answer. He was just expecting like, what are the real use cases when you have to use controller and rest controller, like that. So we know that, right? Controller is the annotation we are going to use to define controller layer, especially controller we are going to use when you are having view layer integrated as part of our Spring application or Spring Boot application. So that means model and view layer point of view, we know that whenever we integrated any JSP layer as part of our application, and whenever we want to load JSP files why as part of response, then we have to go with controller, so that internally we will have view resolvers. So whatever the method return value we given, it is going to consider as a model and view object, or maybe it is going to consider as a view resolver name when you take an at the rate controller. But whenever you want to implement REST services, yes, by using at the rate controller annotation, on every method level, you have to use one more annotation called as at the rate response body annotation. So then that means by using at the rate controller, you are going to define two types of endpoints. One is view resolver endpoints and second one is REST services endpoint. But in this case, again, Spring Framework thought like most of the times people are implementing nowadays REST services. That's the reason when you take an at the rate controller, every method level you have to add at the rate response body annotation. The assume you are implemented 500 REST services, then 500 times you have to define at the rate response body annotation if you are going with the at the rate controller. So to avoid this problem, they came up with a one annotation called as at the rate rest controller annotation. So this is 100% is we have to use only for REST API implementation, but not for the view resolver endpoints. Why? The reason is REST controller annotation is the combination of controller annotation as well as response body annotation. So that means whenever you define a class with REST controller annotation and whenever you define any endpoint methods, request mapping methods, by default, those methods are always annotated with at the rate response body annotation internally. So that means you can avoid adding this annotation every time at every endpoint method level when you are purely working on 100% REST APIs. So it's better to choose this REST controller annotation. That is how you have to explain the use cases. The moment we mentioned about response body annotation in this question level, he asked like what exactly the response annotation is going to do in reality with respect to in an action. So that means whenever you sent a request, once the method got executed, whatever the value we are returning from that endpoint method, what will happen, guys? For example, assume you are returning some list of student objects. Then what this annotation will do is this annotation will invoke internally HTTP message converters, and then HTTP message converters are going to invoke either Jackson converter or XML converter based on our produces attribute what we configured and all, or what we configured as part of our application. Simply it is going to invoke internally HTTP message converters with respect to Jackson or XML converter point of view, and the Java objects are going to be converted to respective response format, either JSON or XML what we configured or what is being expected by the client. So that is how you have to explain for this interview question. After that, he was asking like how you are handling exceptions as part of your application. So that means we know that whenever we are working with application development, every time definitely we are going to get compile time exceptions, runtime exceptions, and we have to take care of all exception handling, especially like null pointer exceptions, index out of bounds exception, right? So he was asking like how you are handling with respect to business logic point of view, what kind of exceptions you are getting, or whatever the exceptions you are getting, how you are handling, like that. So then we mentioned, the candidate mentioned here in this case is, so they are handling exceptions. First thing is by taking try catch blocks with respect to business logic implementation. That means the instantly they are handling the exception in that specific scenario point of view, and they are recovering from that exception with respect to business logic use cases point of view. And after that, the candidate mentioned as sometimes they are handling couple of base common exceptions by writing controller advice classes, and then they are handling those exceptions globally across all controller classes level whenever they got some exception, like that. So then immediately continuation to that, he taken question like what is controller advice annotation, how you are going to use it, and what are the advantage of it is. So then you have to explain about controller advice annotation, like why we are using controller advice annotation when. So that means it's simply like an exception handling with respect to Spring Web Module point of view. So whenever any exception occurs at controller layer level, if that exception is not being handled internally in that layer, so then it will approach the controller advice classes, and internally we will write exception handler methods, right? We discussed all these things as part of our previous Spring Boot tutorial on our channel, right? So then it will find out the respective exception handler method, suitable exception handler methods, and it will trigger that exceptional handler method execution, and that will be converted as a specific response to the respective call, like that. So now he was asking like, okay, when you are dealing with all unchecked exceptions, nothing but runtime exceptions, then how you are handling the checked exceptions point of view. So this is also you can handle some, I mean, you can explain them such a way like you are going to handle with respect to try catch blocks, even though it is a checked exception. And then in case if you don't want to handle that exception from that current method, you are just using a code keyword called as throws keyword, and you're just leaving that exception handling to the caller method level. Like you can explain couple of use cases in this case. Now, how your next question is how you are performing database operation in your application, like that he was asking. So that means his intention is what module you are using. So then person asks, explain like they are using Spring Boot JPA as part of their application, and they are using all Spring Boot JPA methods with respect to basic code operations point of view, pagination, sorting point of view, and sometimes even though they are having any native SQL queries, they are using entire JPA libraries to do all stored procedures execution point of view, like that he was explained. Then he was okay with that answer and everything. And after that he asked one more real-time scenario point of view, what are the profiles, and when you have to go for the profiles, just explain couple of use cases, like that. So that means what is a profiles case here. So we understood, right? In our previous sessions also we discussed Spring Boot profiles. Yeah, the profiles is all about enabling the configuration to a specific environment point of view. So that means it is completely depends on most of the times in our lower level environments with respect to production environment. That means generally whenever we are working with any application development, we are going to maintain multiple environments like dev, system integration testing, right, UAT testing, and as well as production environment, like, right. So that means dev, sit, UAT, prod, all these environments, we are going to have different configuration information, right? So to manage all this configuration information individually to a specific environment point of view, we are going to use profiles with respect to properties file, and sometimes we are going to manage some of couple of bean objects specific to an environment point of view, or then also we are going to use profile annotation, right? So those are all use cases, those are all explanation you have to provide here. Yeah, this is what we discussed more and more in our previous Spring Boot tutorial point of view also. At last you asked one of the programming question like get length of each word and array of string values by using stream API. So here the point here it is expecting output in this case is as a map. So that means in this case map means the word, finally the word and its length we have to capture in the format of map format. So that means the output, the return value should be in this case map with respect to word and length. So what you have to do in this case, you are going to take arrays dot stream of array value, and then finally you will get this stream object, and there you are going to use some collect method internally. As part of collect method, you are going to take each word, okay, and then you are going to find out length of that word, and you're going to make a stream operation in this case, and finally you're going to collect it as a map point of view. So in continuation to that, he was asking how you are going to print the words which are having less, the length is greater than 3. So that means simply in this case, we are going to use again, once the stream object got formed, you are going to use the length filter method, and inside the filter method, you are going to check the length of each word, and which are satisfying that condition. You are going to take some for each method, and you are going to print that word greater than 3 length. So that means he was just checking, here it is, what is the confidence level of writing stream API operations in this case. That is what he observed in this case most of the times. That is what I understood from this question. So this is all about the session, what happened. This is all about my overview as a panel, or as from the panel perspective, why these are all questions are triggered with respect to the candidate interview session. So let's catch up with another set of interview questions. I have one more set of interview questions which are being asked as part of TechM, and these are all questions shared by one more person. So I'm requesting if anyone else of you are attending any interview sessions with respect to any organization. So if you feel like you can share those questions with me, you can just share these questions on this email ID DileepIT Academy, so that we can discuss those questions over the public platform, and it is going to helpful to so many people. Like if you are started helping each other, it will made the preparation is very easy with respect to overall all the organization, and it is going to helpful to so many peoples also. So that's why if anybody would like to share your interview questions as part of your recent interviews with respect to any organization, just mention which company which company you attended, and what is the experience and point of view you attended that session, and then followed by so how much time it went, and then followed by that questions. That's all. So you just share it with me on this email ID so that I can discuss those questions in the public forum, and it is going to helpful for everyone. So thanks to all. Let's connect with next session again.